let's just take a look at the initial, the initial effect of this. When I hover over, the opacity raises to 1, and the same with this as well. However, what I want is to create some kind of effect as I navigate my mouse between the two, the only one that's shown or at 100% opacity is the one with my mouse on. So hopefully that sort of sums up what I'm trying to do. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this inside the callback function, and then we're going to make a few modifications a bit later on. So what I want to do is I want to use a selector, the same selector, which is .fade2. So this now means every other, this means every element on the page that has the class fade2, and then I'm going to go ahead and say fade2, and then I want to fade that to at a speed of 100 back to 0.4. So we need to make a couple of modifications in here, and then we're going to make a little modification with regards to the callback function in a minute, because I'm creating this in a way that doesn't quite look right at first. So let's just run through this. We're setting the opacity to all of our fade2 elements to 0.4. Then as we fade over a fade2 element, we set the currently moused over element to fully visible, and we set all other elements to 0.4. Now, by all other elements, I don't mean all other elements as opposed to the one that we have our mouse over, because this selector is not quite enough, and we're going to be looking at something we can add in here in just a minute. So at the moment this works, well, it doesn't work, and you can see why. As I fade over each element, the selector that we've used, which is fade2, picks up the currently moused over selector as well. So we need to add something in here that's going to stop this from happening. So I'm going to say just dot not, and inside here this. So essentially, in plain English, it does make sense. So we are fading the current element, this element, to 1, the one that we have our mouse over, and then every other element but not this element, i.e. not the one that we faded, how we have our mouse over, fade to 0.4. So now when we open up our browser and we hover over this element and then we go to this one, you can see that they interchange, and you can see that we obviously only ever show full opacity to the element that we have our mouse over. And obviously we could go ahead to index.php, we could copy this image, and we could paste it there, and then we could go ahead and refresh, and we have the effect for all 3 images. So when I look at this, I think something like a photo gallery, something that you have a full focus on a particular image only, and this is faded in. Now there is one more problem here, in the sense that when I hover over this one, you might not be able to notice it at the speed it's at, but let's go ahead and just slow down the animation just for 1 second. Let's go ahead and set this to let's say 700, and we'll go ahead and set this one. In fact, let's set it to a second, and you'll be able to see it a lot better. Now watch what happens. I've faded this in, fair enough, but now watch what happens when I roll over the next image. Now you'll notice that it took a second, obviously, for the fade in to happen, but what happens is the element that's currently in focus fades in, but the other element doesn't fade out until this particular animation is complete. And that's where we've gone wrong, in the sense that we've used the callback function. Now this callback function, remember, only actually completes what's inside of it once the current fade2 has finished, so the current animation has finished. So what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut this line out, and I'm going to just get rid of the callback function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down a line and paste this in here. So now what's going to happen is we fade the particular element to an opacity of 1 after a second. I'm going to go ahead and reduce this back to 500, or to 500. But then, instead of using a callback function and waiting for the animation to complete, we just simply use this to fade out the other element at the same time. So now what happens is we get a much better effect, and this one fades out, each one fades out as the other one is in view, or has their mouse over. So let's go ahead and reduce the speed even more to back to 0.1 of a second, and this just gives a really nice hover over effect, you know, much like a gallery would. So we, you know, when we write code, we think of it in the sense of, oh, we could go ahead and use the callback function and take advantage of that to then run another piece of code once the animation or once we've faded this in or out. But in actual fact, it's better that we've used this on 2 lines to be able to create a sort of a more flowing effect through each image. And obviously you can go ahead and you can just go ahead and copy these images to, you know, sort of as many images on a page as you like. You know, these could be sort of like dynamically loaded, you know, with a sort of like a back-end web development file. You could just go ahead and load in a load of images in your gallery, or just keep them static, it doesn't really matter. But as long as it's got this fade to class, we take advantage of this really nice functionality. So we've looked at setting the CSS opacity to 0.4, we've looked at obviously an event here, we've looked at fading this in, and we've more importantly looked at this not selector here, because without this vital piece of code, we get this really odd sort of effect when we hover over, it just automatically fades that particular element out. So we've just created another condition here to say not the particular element that has the mouse over. So this effect is really fun to play with, and it's extremely easy to make it. Like I said, if you had, you know, sort of tiny thumbnails on a page and you wanted to sort of fade this in, even a really large image gallery, it would look really nice. So just this code here and just, you know, appending this class or applying this class to elements, we've managed to create this really cool sort of gallery fade in effect.